everybody. It's such a delight to be hosting this session today at the Ecoversities Conference. I just want to say thanks for inviting us. I'm going to introduce myself, talk a little bit about the book I'm writing that is the impetus for this session, and then introduce Method and Patrick and ask them a bunch of questions. And I just want to say at the beginning that we had a pre-session call earlier this week that was just so wonderful. Patrick and Method had never met each other, and the coming together of their two lineages and practices, I mean, I'll just speak for myself. It was truly delightful and like really quite powerful. So hopefully we can recreate some of that in this session for you all. Um, so just really briefly about me. My name's Rachel Knight. I protect community land rights. I'm a lawyer, and for the past 20 years, I've worked alongside frontline legal advocates to protect Indigenous and customary land rights. Um, and over the years, working in rural communities, living in rural communities, and a lot of solitary time spent in nature, it eventually led me to explore the spiritual dimensions of land beyond the law. And I realized through a long process that we needed to not only talk about land rights, but about land rights, rights. And meanwhile, all along the way that I was lawyering around the world, my personal path led me to be sitting in ceremony with a group, a very small group of women. And over the past 16 years, we've been developing and remembering an embodied Jewish women's ceremonial practice rooted in ancient Jewish women's like ways of being, ways of honoring the holy and honoring the land. So as I started realizing that there was so much more to land and the more than human world than just the law, my own life brought me deeply into that practice. So I left my job as a lawyer and I'm writing a book about people around the world who are remembering and reviving their ancestors' land honoring and land feeding ceremonies and rituals, not just in their backyards, but at scale in community. Um, and I just want to talk. I'll talk for about 3 minutes about the book, and then I'll hand it over into our what will be probably a very interesting conversation with Method and Patrick. But basically, my book started out as kind of a like I. It was a response to the cultural appropriation I saw all over the place in California, as well as what felt to me as the hollowness of land acknowledgements. But it became something much, much richer and more nuanced. And so I really started to understand that simply naming the original indigenous holders of the land we live on is more performative than reparative, and that it was time for people, no matter who they are, no matter who they descend from, and no matter where they live, to deeply relate to our local lands and ecosystems. So this book basically starts from the premise that for millennia, for right around 275,000 years, actually, human cultures and cosmologies were rooted in the understanding that humans were just one kind of conscious entity in a world of conscious and spirited entities. Elemental forces, celestial bodies, lands, waters, mountains, animals, and plants were related to as sentient beings or deities. And humans tended, honored, and celebrated them in elaborate rituals and simple day-to-day practices. Our ancestors held ceremonies before planting and harvesting crops. They made ritual offerings before building, crafting, or making. They gave gifts before and after hunting and gathering. They danced, sang, and made offerings at lunar and solar events. And they otherwise wove themselves into a unified kaleidoscopic fabric of sentient existence. But today, living in urban, modern societies, a lot of us feel profoundly disconnected from the lands that we live on and the beings that sustain us and surround us, and our ancestors' rituals that once wove us into relationship with the more than human world. And seeking spiritual depth, we approach spirituality often as an individual experience. We like sit in ceremony and pray for our own lives, rather than being a communal experience that's in service to a greater good. And often, and I'll just speak for myself, it's like if you don't know your own ancestors' like ceremonial structures and rituals, it's really easy to blithely appropriate other cultures' ceremonial practices without permission, even with the best intentions. I've been in so many places where people are just taking bits and bobs of other cultures' rituals, not really knowing about the whole thing and just using it for their own way of being spiritual. And it's well-meaning, but I just think we can do better. So this book addresses these ruptures. It's actually like a step-by-step how-to guide for reconnecting with our ancestors' land honoring practices. And it's drawn from in-depth interviews with more than 30 cultural activists around the world, um, two of whom are Method and Patrick. And my goal in writing the book is to ignite a global movement of people who take time to honor and feed the more than human world, creating new ways of relating to the lands and ecosystems we live in. Sometimes I talk about my book saying that if we're talking about rewilding, we have to actually rewild ourselves before we can work on regenerating and rewilding degraded ecosystems. And like our own bodies, our own minds, our own like innerness is has been degraded by millennia at this point of capitalism and imperialism and colonization, etc. Anyway, so basically the heart of the book is that I believe that vulnerable, open relating with the more than human world is available to everyone, everywhere, all the time. And that's because every human has the right to honor and relate with the land wherever we are because it feeds the land. It's not about us, it's about being in service to the land and the more than human world. And like one way I talk about this is that to argue that I have no right to be in relationship with or make offerings to land I live upon or I'm moving through because I live in a settler colony or because I'm not indigenous to those lands. It's kind of like arguing that because I'm just a visitor in someone's home, I should not be polite, gracious, and grateful and bring them presents and thank them for hosting me. Like we should all be doing that with the lands we live on all the time. So I'm on a mission to get that message out there and to help people take steps to figure out how to do it. So one other thing this book does is that everyone I interviewed who's a major like person in the book is going to be a co-author and will receive an equal share of any profits earned. And I'm doing this to sort of upend the current academic model of published writers claiming intellectual property rights over the people they interview's expertise and wisdom. So I'm just really committed to bringing in all of my co-authors into all the things that have to do with this book. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce Method and Patrick and ask them a bunch of questions so you can see how brilliant and amazing they are. So Method Gunditsa is a Zimbabwean environmentalist, traditionalist, and director of the Earth Lore Foundation in Southern Africa. He left a successful corporate finance career to focus on reviving indigenous farming practices, traditional seeds, and local governance systems to foster climate change resilience. He supports communities to revive their ancestral seed and farming systems, as well as the ceremonies and rituals that surround those systems. He's also active at the government and policy level, working to raise understanding of the role of sacred sites, culture, spirituality, food systems, and indigenous African conservation practices, and to really get across how important these are in the context of climate change. And Patrick, I already forgot how to say your last name out loud. Patrick Wieryszon.
Yes,
You
got
can.
it.
He's a Polish zerka, which is a native Slavic priest and a farmer. His Polish family's deep roots in Slavic folklore and agricultural traditions led him to become an adherent of the Slavic native faith, which is also called Rodnoveri. Did I say that right? Rodnoveri?
Yes, yes, that's right.
Okay. As a priest, he leads a local community of Rodnoveres and currently serves as a spokesman for the Polish Rodnover Religious Association, ROD, a state recognized religious organization of the Slavic native faith. And he integrates Slavic native spirituality with his work as a farmer, taking care of the needs of the soil and the vines in his vineyard while maintaining a good relationship with the spirits of the land and the Slavic gods governing over nature. So when we met last week, as I said, we discovered a surprising number of similarities between Polish Rodnovery and the Zimbabwean Shona ways of honoring land and the more than human world. And it was quite astounding, and I felt really touched. So let's hope some of that can be shared with you today. I'm going to take a breath because that was a lot. Um, I hope that I didn't go too fast for the translators. It's just such a delight to be with you guys here today. So the first question I have, for Method and Patrick is, can you tell us a little bit about your childhoods or your trajectory towards working to revive land honoring rituals and ceremonies? I think growing up, you both saw and experienced some degree of the old ways, enough to know they existed, and your lives led you to be working to revive them. So I'm going to hand it over. Why don't we start with you, Method, and then we can go to Patrick next.
Thank you, Rachel. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, in all the respective time zones where you are. And thank you for making time to be part of this dialogue that we have this evening. As Rachel has said, my name is Method Gundiza from Zimbabwe, and working with an organization accompanying rural communities here in South Africa in two provinces of Mpumalanga and Limpopo, and also communities in my own home district of Bikita, Masvingo province of Southeast Zimbabwe. My story is a long story, but in responding to the prompt that you have shared, Rachel, growing up as a boy in rural Zimbabwe, I experienced a lot. Growing up knowing that there were designated kraals within the village where bulls would be named after the clans of the respective families that kept them. Growing up knowing that millet was staple. Growing up knowing that there was a ritual to ask for rain. There was a ritual to offer first fruits. There was a ritual to mitigate the effects of infestations like of insects, of disease on the crops and generally on the land. Growing up knowing that the elders always respected everybody with whom they shared the land. And yet in a very, very small period of time, from the, I would say, late 80s into the mid to late 90s, all of this just vanished. And growing up seeing it and vanishing in my eyes too, this is the inspiration that has led you to be with me today. Because as a Zimbabwean, when I migrated to South Africa and interacting with people and organizations that were talking about how to go back to that mutually enhancing relationship with the Earth community, all those memories came back to me. I'm talking here about the Gaia Foundation in the UK, working with several African-based organizations within what is called the Earth Jurisprudence Collective. And triggering my memories, I see in the chart the African Biodiversity Network, definitely. And triggering all these memories in my mind, and inspiring me to go back to my own roots, to work with elders in the stories that I will be sharing with you a little bit more as we go into this dialogue. And I am very, very happy to be here today and to share with you those stories about our human relationship with the land and everybody who resides on the land, and our relationship with the cosmos and everybody who resides there. And I look forward to the dialogue tonight. It's night for me here, so I'll keep on referring to it as night. Thank you.
Patrick, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, of course. The first thing I will say is sorry that I will be barely visible, but I'm traveling and oh, there's light, but yeah, for a while, and it won't be probably for long. So, if you asked about my childhood experiences, I would say they were very formative because many of you can have maybe a premise about Poland that we are a very Catholic country, but actually the Catholicism that was practiced here, maybe to some degree still is, uh, was the kind of folk religion which syncretized actually a lot of these old Slavic native motifs and developed it even after centuries when Christianity came to Poland. So it didn't fade, in one decade or even one century. It was still kept alive up until now. And me, growing as a child, I was raised by my grandparents, who both were from very rural communities, and they were still adhering to very all of these archaic traditions. So I grew knowing them. They became organically, a part of my spirituality. Let's call it this way, and part of my practice. And when I was a teenager, I discovered that these things that are um, the actual essence, yes, of how I understand and how I manage the relationship with the spiritual world, have their roots in the Slavic native faith, and that's when I, let's say, became a rather more consciously, because I would say to some degree, on since always, yes, because of this the way that I was raised. So. So yeah, I think these childhood experiences, the tradition that we experience, passed from passed from our elders. That's something really important that helps us then to even go back to the roots and find deeper. So uh, I can actually agree only with method. And as Rachel said, we already met for a short meeting before, so I'm very happy to meet with Rachel and method and you guys. And I hope for a great discussion further.
One thing that I just want to bring out from both of their narratives that are in the book is that, and maybe it's, yeah, is that both of them, and in fact everyone I interviewed, had to really grapple with like the degree of, I would say, like colonization or imposition of Christianity that was put over local spirituality. And I remember Patrick saying, like, he finally sat down and read a Bible and was like, this has nothing to do with what my grandparents have been doing that they call Christian. And I know that Method is in his own complex process of recognizing like how much Christianity was put on top of African spirituality and really like taking up that apart. And for me as a Jew, just learning about rabbinical Judaism and how the men in power basically got rid of all the female priests, priestesses, got rid of all the dancing and the ecstasy and the magic and the music and the singing and just made it all about texts. And they like the way that the book goes quite in depth into how much effort was put in by ruling powers to sort of quash and flatten the massive animist spirituality that was present before. And so I think both of you have really had a deep journey also in going behind Christianity to what was your ancestral practices. Anyway, it's a very deep thing. The other question I wanted you guys to really go into was about the connection between land honoring rituals and ceremonies and agriculture and sacred seeds and agricultural like offerings to the land and how that works in your culture and cosmology. And also if you want to talk about your own process of looking underneath Christianity, you can talk about that too. I don't want to limit you. Why don't you go first, Method, again?
Mm, thank you, thank you. So when we talk about land honoring ceremonies and rituals and connection with agriculture, um, it is the reality of how life actually works. Agriculture is the process of us making our own food. But Rachel, you were talking about hunting and gathering, and it feels that that is an old thing. But in reality, it is what it is still right now because we still kill animals and we forage on plants and fruits. Just that we do it in a very, very different way, where the animals have been captive and the fruits and veggies are also captive. And yet in all this, we recognize that nature still plays the same role of producing food for us, the same way it was doing 1,000 years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago. And so, in effect, we are still hunting and gathering and foraging, but now hunting in cages and foraging inside fences, which is the sadness that living in our times bring. And yet, when we go back to the ways of the elders, the ways of our ancestors, that journey that I told you I have been on, having been in South Africa, going back to journey with my own elders to remember how food was made and to remember how food was available to us and how, as humans, we acknowledged that food was made for us and that we didn't make food. No matter how much effort we put, food is a product of the natural cycles of life. So I think that deep, 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 deep down, when we talk about rituals and ceremonies around agriculture, this is that understanding that food is made for us. And so we acknowledge that and we give gratitude. So in my land with my people, we have gone through the revival of the whole cycle of the beginning of how food is made. Looking in our case, for example, when spring comes in September in the southern hemisphere, here in Southern Africa, starting off with the rituals to ask for rain. So the elders acknowledge and understand the role of rain in everything that happens for food to be before us. every night, every morning, every afternoon. And in ritual, the elders gather the energy of the community. They gather everyone in the community. They gather all the respective elements. And in this particular instance, for us, the critical element being millet, which is staple to us. And so beer is made, sadza, our local pap or soft porridge is made, sacred cows are slaughtered, goats are slaughtered, and this is to honor and to trigger the power of rain to come into the land. And that begins the year. And it progresses into the first fruits when having fruited and our crops are ready to be eaten. Elders again take representative items of groundnuts, of maize, of millet, of sorghum, of sweet cane, of juco beans, of everything, of calabash, taking it back to the mountains where the ritual for rain was performed, giving back to the ancestors who in our cosmology are the soil. When we greet the ancestors, we greet the soil. And the ancestors and our chiefs are represented. The ancestors and the soil are represented by our chiefs, whom we see, who sit in those thrones in custody of that which the ancestors and the land has passed on for generations and generations. So the elders trek up the mountains to offer those first to the ancestors and to the rest of the other beings. These are the bees, these are the monkeys, in our case, the baboons, the birds, in their various forms, and say, you gave us the rain. Here we've got food, and you eat first before we do. So that is offered. And then we as humans start eating. So I had the privilege of being in that ritual last Saturday. And I'm not talking about stories here. I was invited by the elders who think that I'm also becoming an elder to become part of that ritual. And tomorrow, I have the privilege again in a different community here in the Mpumalanga province of South Africa on the border with Mozambique to be in ritual to celebrate the first beers of Marula, which also comes together with the first fruits of the year to say Marula beer is ready to be drunk. First fruits are ready to be eaten. So we offer them first before we can eat. So this deep relationship between agriculture and ritual is natural. It is what it has been, as I've said, hunting and gathering. In the old ways, when we didn't have to kill animals that are captured, the elders would go to the forest and ask for permission from the spirits of the land, the spirits of the animals, to say, we have come. We are asking for protein. We are asking for meat for the family. And asking to the spirits of the animals, asking to the spirits of the forest, of the land, and then they would go hunting. So, yeah, agriculture, because it's been reduced to that which is captured, that which is within our convenience and reach, seems as if it's no longer hunting and gathering. And yet, in acknowledging and understanding agriculture as how nature produces for us, we, with my community and other communities here in South Africa and the rest of Africa too, still honor the relationship between food and ritual, and know that as humans, we survive and live on the benevolence of the rest of nature, in terms of animals, in terms of insects, in terms of birds, in terms of plants, for us to live. And in ritual and in ceremony, we honor those relationships. I'll pass it on to my colleague.
Yes, so I could tell you the whole story, but it would sound very, very similar to what Matt already said, because as we talked before, there are many similarities. Uh, as I told once, this kind of traditional religions, traditional rituals, etc., is like telling the same story but with other languages. So we will find similarities around the whole world in different cultures, especially in agrarian communities. Yes, because I mean that's something that modern people do not see, and that's why I sometimes tell we are today socialized this kind of mentality that everything is like dependent on you. Yes, for example, you have a corporate job, so if you screw up, the responsibility is on you. And if you work with land, if uh, if you have even a garden that you work a whole season in a garden, you will see uh, how little depends on what actually you can do. Yes, so you do what you do. You you serve actually. You serve the soil. You serve the plants, and of course you serve the gods, the spirits, the ancestors, and then you harvest this small percent of your work, which is hard anyways, because it's a ton of hard work. But then there's the small amount of your work, and then there's this 90% of what the land, the gods, the spirits did for you. So nothing like this worldview teaches us how everything is intertwined. Yes, how we are all connected, and not only uh, in the community. Yes, so uh, that's also an important thing that we value our communities because it is health, it is survival, it is. I mean, the mankind wasn't created to be individuals. Yes, and thus the spirituality, the ritual, everything it revolves also around the community. So we also begin in spring. We have rituals that celebrate or ask for rain, for fertility, that celebrate the first thunderstorm because it is something like Method said. You give the first harvests, yes, to the gods, uh, because you acknowledge their work, and also you start working when the gods show you the signs to start to work. So the first thunderstorm at spring is this sign that we have that that the earth has been fertilized by Perun, the thunder god, and it is ready, to bear fruits, to grow grains. So then you can plow the fields, you can sow the seeds, and and yes, that's how it works. When the summer is there, we have rituals and prayers to prevent from hailstorms. So the hailstorms won't destroy the grains on the maturing of the fields. Yes, and I mean the whole premise of the yearly cycle is viewed as connected to agriculture, connected to land, to how everything is. And the biggest hope in this and the biggest joy in this that this is a cycle. So even when everything matures and then slowly dies, you know that it will be revived again. And that's something beautiful. That's like part of the beauty of this worldview of following these traditions. So what can I add? I was surprised. Like when we talked for the first time with Method, I was surprised. Not maybe very shocked, but surprised how many similarities we have even regarding millet, which for our ancestors, like the old Slavs, even in the early Middle Ages, the millet was the first and foremost grain that was planted. So you can see that sometimes different opposite hemispheres can be connected. Thing which is very simple, but at the same time very important. Um, so what can I say? And regarding food, uh, our traditions have great awareness around food. So it is not well seen to waste food, to throw it away. For example, we view the bread as like especially sacred. We have a lot of rituals around bread. Even that, and this is something that I've also learned from my grandmother, for example. If a slice of bread fell on the ground, you have to take it up and kiss it in like uh, uh, a gesture of apologize. So yeah, I can pass the microphone to Rachel back.
I love all of this so much. I realize we only have 18 minutes left, so I'm going to combine these next two questions. So, can you tell us about how you supported communities to revive land honoring ceremonies? And like, is it actually possible to perfectly revive our ancestors' ceremonies? And how do we adapt and co-create rituals for our time, learning from our elders, but also allowing for new elements and evolving culture? Like, how have you guys revived what you can, but also recognize that culture is always evolving, right? And we can't go back to how things used to be in the past. We're in 2026 now. So how do we, what have you guys done to take communities backwards, but also looking forwards? You know, I always think about the Sankofa symbol. It's like go back to get it, and like it's a bird going back to get a sacred egg and then flying forward, right? So how do we how have you helped your communities to revive lost and or eroding rituals, and how do you adapt them for this time? Patrick, why don't you go first this time? Looks like Patrick froze. I'll switch it back to you, Method.
Thank you. Um, as I shared with you earlier, having grown up seeing and experiencing certain things in the community, on the land, uh, for me, it was a journey that started off in June 2014. And I want to quote a friend of mine, Apolline from Benin, who, and men will be very familiar with this, that when we pee and we are not peeing in the toilet, you will you throw your pea the furthest, and that as you end, that pea actually progresses towards you. And I'm talking about back to roots, that for me, it was a journey of going back, speaking to the elders one by one, remembering things that they could remember, bringing the elders together as their numbers grew, building into what we call community dialogues, where elderly men and women started gathering. And in these circles, remembering how things used to be and how they were done, making the commitment to go back to that path and walking it again. You know what you ask, Rachel, the question around, can we bring back how exactly it was, is such a difficult process. The things have changed. The landscape has changed. What the elders remember in some contexts could be 50%, in some contexts 60%, 80%, 90%. However, when there is enough of knowledgeable elders to bring back a practice, it is possible to rebuild, to reconstruct it with what the elders remember of the past, but also appreciate of the current context. And as I speak about that, we have a working tool within the African Earth Jurisprudence Collective, a group of organizations working in different countries of South Africa, Zimbabwe, Kenya, Benin, Uganda, Cameroon, which we call the ecological mapping, eco-cultural mapping, where we look at how the land looked like in the past, in ancestral times, looking at how the land looks like right now, and then using that to imagine how the land can look and how we imagine the land looking like as we go forward. And in imagining that, we situate the different rituals, the different ceremonies in the structure of the land that we see going forward as we see it today. And that simply means there are some things we may not be able to bring exactly as they were before. But as I've shared with you that in my cosmology, the land means the ancestors. We see the ancestors today in the sitting chief. And so when we greet the chief, we say we greet the soil, we greet the ancestors. And in doing that, we count on ancestral wisdom to show us that as things have changed, and as we desire and work to bring back what we can, that they show us that which is appropriate for the land as it is today. And that is work that is blessed from the land as it used to be and from the rituals as they used to be. And that strengthens the work that we do today. Thank you.
Thank you, Method. Beautiful. Patrick, over to you. Did you get the question? You froze for a minute. I'm not sure if you heard it.
Okay, could you repeat the question?
Yes, I was just I was saying, how have you supported communities to revive land honoring ceremonies? But also along the way, is it possible to perfectly revive our ancestors' ceremonies? Like, how do we take what we can from the past, but also co-create new ways of making these relevant for our times and the lands we're on now and the way the world is today?
Yeah, of course, of course. Thank you. So uh, we here in Poland, as the Polish Broadway Association RUD, we operate as a registered state-recognized religion. Our, let's say, work of uh, propagating the communities is we give a legal framework for these communities to operate in accordance to Polish law and using any support that we can have due to the law that guarantees us religious freedom. And we are heavily involved in a lot of educational initiatives. Yes, so we try to propagate this knowledge to different people. We are trying to create communities that would go back to these ancestral practices. Um, and regarding the second part of the question, um, we need to recognize the structures because the structure and the ritual and the myth and the in anything is the most important thing. The other things is just how the structure is expressed. So the means changed over time. Yes, uh, our ancestors first harvested grains with sickles, then the sites appeared, and it changed how the harvest process looks like. Now we have these big harvesters that harvest grain, uh, but still you can, in all of these methods of harvest, for example, you can incorporate the the ritual. Yes, the greeting the spirits of the field, thanking them for for good yield, etc., etc. So the means change, but the ritual in its core remains basically unchanged. That's my view. We can we cannot do some things like I don't know. We cannot slaughter a sacrificial animal because Polish law doesn't allow us to do it because we have very high health and safety rules. So we would have to have the whole meat processing plant to do it, and it has to be a temple simultaneously, for example. But it would be a very strange installment, I guess. But uh, but yeah, these are the things that there are things that we are not or won't be able to do, maybe, but there's a lot of things, I would say 80-95% we can even live, with the early Middle Ages or even in the 19th century when it was still very, very lived and very important. Uh, but we need to see the value of it. Uh, and apply the value and the core of it to our lives. That's basically it.
I want to leave time for questions, but I also want to ask you guys the last questions we prepared, which was that, and maybe we can all do it at once, but what advice would you have for people eager to revive their own ancestors? And maybe they have five different kinds of ancestors, but their own ancestors' kinds of land honoring rituals and ceremonies. And if you guys have a question, please raise your hand so we can just get a sense of how many questions are waiting. But Method, why don't you jump in with what advice you might have for folks wanting to embark on the path that you've taken?
Mm. The path to reviving the connection with ancestors in ritual and ceremony is not an easy one. In my context, um, at least 95% of the population is Christian. And what that means is that the way to honor, the way to consult, and the way to be in communion with ancestors in traditional ways is pagan and is considered bad and wrong. And so when one engages in this type of work, one has to remember and to be ready to deal with all the names that one can be called in this whole process. So, knowing that it is not an easy journey, the journey that Christianity has taken to take root in our communities is probably the same timing and the same journey that this process of reviving, working with elders to bring back the confidence that that which is ours is correct, it is good, and it is contextually right for us. It takes time. The elders have to deal with this. We have to work with them very deliberately to bring back that confidence, and it doesn't happen over time. And those who have the gifts of direct spiritual communication with the ancestral world, too, do not immediately get their confidence. And in some cases, several other rituals have to be performed to re-establish that connection between the ancestral world and the living world for that guidance and that provision to still happen. So it is not easy. And yet we know as we are discussing and understanding that, Rachel, you talked about rights, RIAGHTS versus rights, RITES. That when we talk about rights, RITES, and that we come to that, which is about gratitude, which is about honor, we have very little to talk about rights, as in RIGHTS, because in knowing the rights, RITES, we know that everything is in place and everything is honored for its role in life. And that's a long journey to come back to because the world has become so glued to rights, and particularly rights of humans, human rights. And that's a long journey. And perhaps I will stop there and throw it back to you.
Patrick, do you want to jump in? We only have a few more minutes, and it looks like someone wants to ask a question as well.
Yeah, all right. So I will give quick advice. If you want to reconnect, start practicing these traditional religions and worldviews, first be humble towards the material and the tradition that you are trying to learn and understand, because it's a collective experience of generations. Yes, so you as an individual do is to be humble when you approach it. Otherwise, it would be very disrespectful in my opinion. The other thing, don't expect that these traditions will be, I don't know, tailored for you or something like this. You will find many things that you, for example, on the first glance, you won't understand. You will reject because we are deformed by the modern modern worldview, and you might find some things uncomfortable. just be humble and try to understand them, why they are, for what they are, what are the benefits of it. Maybe it's sometimes a very humbling experience, and you can learn more from it than just
Looks like Patrick froze again. Um, do we have a minute to go over, or does this have to end on the hour precisely?
No, actually, oh, sorry. No, actually, we have another 15 minutes that you can have past the hour to wrap up everything completely. We do have a session coming in at 3:30 and you need to make space for them. But please, anybody who has a question, I see Archana has a question. And anyone else, please raise your virtual hands. They're under the reactions button, a little smiley button at the bottom next to the interpretation button. If you do that, then it's an easy one for us to be able to see who would like to ask a question of our esteemed panelists, Rachel, Patrick, and Method. Go ahead, Archana.
Method and Path, Patrick, can you put your contact information or how you want to be, if you want to be contacted, how people could reach you in the chat before this is over?
Yes.
And it looks like we have a bunch of questions. Why doesn't everyone who raised their hand just ask them all at once, and then Method and Patrick and I can respond to them all together, since I don't want to go too far.
Well, maybe one after the other.
Yeah, well, okay, one after the other, fine. Archana, why don't you, Archana, why don't you go first?
Archana. It's Archana. I'm from India, and I work in the Eastern Himalayas, and I work with the indigenous communities based over here. And one of the things that I have been navigating my way through is what indigenous wisdom is still relevant and valid for the younger generation today, because even indigenous knowledge evolves. It doesn't stay where it is, right? And today, the younger generation is finding it very difficult to make ends meet or sustain, because it's not just their practices in the communities that have those practices are there, but everything else around them is changing so rapidly and so fast. So how do they stay rooted to their own traditional practices and ancestral wisdom, and at the same time become so relevant and stay connected in the world today and navigate their way through it? So what are these kind of challenges that was there? And what you mentioned, Method, that church does not like a lot of things, right? And one of the things we try not to do is cultural appropriation, because now even going to church is a culture of that community. So we need to navigate our way very sensitively towards, while inviting people to reconnect with earth and their roots, how do we not tell them not to listen to, what generations have been following? So how do you find and strike these fine balances? And what did you do to invite the younger generation back into the heart or the womb of this wisdom that you have been protecting and saving? For both of you, Patrick and Method, I would love to know how you found these, you merged these gaps between intergenerational, from the intergenerational lenses. Thank you.
That is such a great question. Yayo, do you want to ask yours?
Thank you. So we started 25 years ago, Unitierra, after indigenous communities expelled the teachers of their village and said that school has been more damaged to their culture than Catholic Church. And the main reason they said it was the disattachment of the young people from the land, because they have to send them to school instead of teaching them how to farm. If you can share some strategies or tell how you're doing to reconnect the youth with the soil through ritual and through spirituality, will be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Leon, did you want to ask your question?
Sure. Thank you, Rachel. Just briefly, yeah, I work in the tourism industry, and with respect to land acknowledgements, I completely agree what you're saying, to a large degree, they are performative and we need to do much better. But I tell you, and I should add that too, I'm working in the United States. And I've been to a couple of tourism conferences in one state. They didn't even mention the tribal people at all. There was no land acknowledgement. So I went up and I did one in to some degree on my own without being officially designated to do that. Nobody asked me to do that. In some way, I was out on a limb by doing it, but I have studied Lakota a little bit, and I got permission from an elder to acknowledge the Oto Missouri people who were there. I've also been in a conference where they talking about sustainability and land management in a state where there's 38 tribal governments. Not a single indigenous person was in the room, and not even acknowledged that they have even collaborated with indigenous wisdom when they're talking about sustainability and land management. So while these land acknowledgements may be performative at the basic level, in some ways they're not even really even happening. So I just wonder, it may be a start, it may not be enough, but what if they're not even doing that minimum?
Very good point. Yes, absolutely. It must be happening all the time everywhere. Yes. But then let's go further. That's my thing. Let's go further than that. Let's bring the indigenous people into the conference and have them be the main speakers. To me, there's a lot to that can be done. But I want to hand it back to Method and Patrick to answer some of the questions.
So may I jump in? All right. So addressing your questions about how to somehow address the youth. Well, I think in my country the situation is like this. Poland is getting secular more and more. People are leaving the Catholic Church, and let's say most of the people become non-religious, atheists, or anything of this sort. But let's say we are one of the alternatives. Yeah, maybe. And because we are local and native, people find something familiar, something that they maybe heard from a great grandmother here, something that maybe they experienced themselves. And that's one of the points when we, to some degree, attract people. On the other hand, it's actually uh, living in modern times, especially yes, if you live in a city, etc. It is always a process of negotiating. Yes, you're being as a Rodnover and you're functioning in the society. So it will be always a kind of a negotiation with the individual and even with the community and the the surrounding. So we need to find our ways somehow, but this will largely depend on circumstances. And I think the main point of this is we shouldn't get mad at it. Just try to find ourselves in, because the world is looks like it looks, and we won't change it in a day. It is worth, of course, it's worth trying to change it, and I think we all struggle to do it in some way, but it needs time and needs patience.
Is there anyone else who would like to
I want to hear
ask a
Method.
question?
I would like Method, I think, was going to answer the questions. Hold on.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Patrick. So again, just revisiting our initial comments on the things that we connected with when we were young, the things we saw, those things that inspire us to be doing what we are doing today, I think is the work that we who are, and some of us who have become elders, need to bring back to the youth. So there was a question about what are you doing to bring back the youth to connect with the land? The youth for intergenerational learning. And I have to say that the agents of this work is to work with the elders to bring back as much as possible that the youth can see and experience in such a way that as we remember the things as elders that were there, the youth too have an opportunity to see and to be able to remember and to pass those things over to the next generation. So when we talk about ceremonies, when we talk about rituals, these are not things that happen in private. In my place, when a ritual happens, it's a full day's activity, which involves walking up the mountains, singing and dancing and drumming and coming back to the homesteads, and in some instances, the whole night. So it's the whole night, it's the whole day. Everybody in the community is involved. The elders, men and women, elderly and young. And in fact, each and every member of the community has a role to play, no matter how small it is. And so, for me, when we bring this back and let the youth experience it and feel the value of it, I think that this is the greatest gift that we are passing on to the youth. And indeed, the youth, as we who may no longer be youth, may be carried away or attracted to modern day practices and lifestyles, but I think that those who are part of the community when the revival is happening become the elders of the next generation to pass on exactly the same knowledge and practice to those who are young in that particular time. So there's always this thing about how do we deliberately focus on the youth. But I think that when we bring ceremony, ritual, and community-wide activities, community defines the whole cross-section of people in it, including the birds and the animals and the insects and the rivers and the mountains in it. And everybody on that land becomes part of the journey to remember how things used to be and to go into a commitment to bring back as much of what it used to be to today. And that includes the youth.
It's such a phenomenal way to end this. Thank you so much, Method. Thank you so much, Patrick.